It's your boy W-I-Z-E, and I'm the host of Stuck in My Mind podcast. Join me on my road to self-discovery as I speak to some amazing guests. They will share their inspirational stories, vast wealth of knowledge, and expertise. So sit back and enjoy the ride. You can find Stuck in My Mind on all major platforms: Google, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, you name it, I'm on it. So you know how your boy Wise does it. Peace out.
Welcome, beautiful world, to the Barbarian Noetics Podcast, where we are dedicated to the elevation of the human spirit and to resisting the status quo. I am your loyal host, Conan Tanner, and I put out one episode every week, sometimes a solo venture, and sometimes I'll bring on a guest. We dive into all sorts of topics related to the elevation of the human spirit, from the intricacies of our physical body's inner workings, to the chakra system, to the nature of addiction and sobriety, to the mysterious gears and essence of existence, life, and the unified field itself. The BNP keeps things spicy with zany audio tidbits to add some humor and flavor to the show, as well as interweaving funky and underappreciated music into the transitions and soothing binaural beats beneath the conversation. I am very excited to welcome you to our growing tribe of philosopher barbarians. Come get wild and woolly with the Barbarian Noetics Podcast, and let's elevate the human spirit together. Find the Barbarian Noetics Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm up on all the platforms, and let's resist this status quo.
Today, I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is the effervescent Bridget B. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And we are joined by a special guest. As usual, we're on a run of special guests lately, and we're going to be for some time because we're trying to expand out a little bit, expand the conversation points way beyond law of attraction and talk about life in all of its different forms. And we have a guest today who's going to give us quite an interesting conversation along that line because he is the author of a book entitled The Summer I Died 20 Times. I mean, that's a title that's got to get your attention no matter how you look at it. Mm-hmm. All about Mr. Fred Rutman. He's going to tell us about that. We're going to find out who he is as a person and learn more about his life when he's not dying during the summer, which is probably a good thing. But Fred, welcome to the program. We're glad that you're able to join us today.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm able to join you.
Absolutely.
I'm glad I'm able to join anyone.
That obviously we have to go to that topic first because that's one of those kind of titles. Like, how could that possibly be? So tell us about The Summer You Died 20 Times.
Well, this started in the summer of 2009, early in the summer of 2009, when I started losing consciousness and hitting my head on whatever was the hardest object in the immediate vicinity.
Ouch.
And It took a while. I was misdiagnosed a whole bunch of times, and I suffered a lot of concussions and post-concussion syndrome and all sorts of things like that. What we eventually discovered was that my heart was stopping and that I had been clinically dead about 20 times.
Wow.
So,
wow.
That's crazy. For your audience that don't know, which is correct. Help me out here.
Yeah, we don't worry about the words. We just spit it out.
Okay. Clinically dead is when your heart stops and you stop breathing at the same time for a certain amount of time. So depending on which medical source, it's, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. So I actually had some incidences where it was recorded it was 5 minutes.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's lengthy. No doubt about that. I'm also curious too because this is actually not the first time I've ever interviewed somebody who had been through near-death experiences. I was telling Bridget just before we came on live here that back when I started the podcast almost 10 years ago, among my first guests was one gentleman who I interviewed twice who had also been through near-death experiences. We had some really interesting conversations. So I'm kind of looking forward to what it is you have to tell us. But I gathered from the webpage I was reading about you that you have some recollection about what you experienced when you were in the midst of those near-death experiences. What can you relate about that?
That's a good question. I don't have the typical near-death experience that
Okay.
other people seem to have had. So I wish I had something like the famous comedian Sam Kinison, who passed, and I don't know if you know his story, but there were multiple people there watching him talk, presumably to God, as he was dying, and having that experience. And, he was a pastor in his prior life. I think he was a Baptist minister. He came from a line of Baptist ministers or from something like that. So the dying part was pretty cut and dry. It was, you're gone in like an amazingly quick amount of time. And the coming back to life part is the part that was so vivid, and you literally feel yourself coming back to life, like all your systems reigniting, and it's like being struck with thousands of lightning bolts at the same time. And the colors are amazing. And, especially for someone who is colorblind in the real world, and you could actually feel the impact of these lightning bolts battering you around.
Wow.
It's just, but on the other hand, because I didn't have the experiences like so many other, I feel kind of ripped off. Like there's no, once you could understand, not seeing, people on the other side or the come to the light or like, okay, twice, 3, but come on, 20 times. Like, I don't know whether to be terrified, thankful. What's the right response here?
Well, you were you were testing the waters over and over again and getting the same result. So, there's some validity in that. There's some value in that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I was in test mode though. I really didn't, and until about the 16th time when they diagnosed me, I didn't really know that I was dying. And that's when it became clear. But I was so battered mentally from all the concussions and trauma and things of that nature. It really didn't dawn on me till like 2 years later that I was like, oh my God, I was dead. Like, I've been dead.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to wrap your mind around that.
Even though you've been through it, it's still hard to wrap your mind around that. And I can understand that. It's so far outside of experience. How could you possibly do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the real challenge, is trying to figure out how do you handle that. Interesting, too, that you haven't had the kinds of experiences that are typically reported, but I think it's important to remember that's perfectly valid. Just because you have the experiences doesn't mean that your experience is any less valid. Yours is just as valid.
Oh, for sure. And, it wasn't just this summer that this happened to me. I had a couple of more seasons where I went through the same thing over and over again because the fix that they gave me turned out to be not a long-term fix, what it should have been. So, there was all sorts of cognitive damage and everything, and there's really no roadmap to try and recover from something like this, except using your own innovation and positivity and thinking that, there's got to be a way to recover. Like, whatever your spiritual orientation, I don't think God makes mistakes. So, or the universe doesn't make mistakes. It's a pretty well-run machine. So there's a reason this happened to me, and I might not understand the reason or ever figure it out, but there's a reason something happened to me.
And yet, from what you're describing, it sounds like you've got some things that you have been able to learn along the way. It sounds like there are some things that you've been able to kind of make sense out of it. At least that's what I'm kind of inferring from what you just said.
Yeah, some days it makes more sense than others.
Well, okay. That's understandable.
You're a little more confident in your conclusions. And then other days it's like, maybe I'm not on the right path. What am I supposed to be doing? So I think that's a normal part of just being alive.
Yeah. Have you been able to answer any of those questions for yourself?
Well, I think telling my story so that it might help others is probably the big takeaway out of this. And being generous with how I coped with the situation. And because I know there's a lot of other people that undergo trauma. Maybe not specifically like I did, but they could use a helping hand. And if I can be that helping hand.
Like you said, the fact is there was no roadmap for you, so you basically had to create your own roadmap as you went along, just because whatever you were experiencing, that became your roadmap. So as you look back on that, I imagine there must be some things that you picked up along the way that said, wow, I was on the right track when I did X, or when I thought about Y, that really helped me a lot, or something like that. What are some of the things that you picked up that actually made it easier for you to recover?
Well, exercise for one. Like, exercise will never do you wrong. And we know a lot more about how exercise physiologically affects your body than we did before. And when you put it under your body under positive stress, it starts to activate these epigenetic, which are subgenetic processes in your body that activate healing and work to decrease inflammation. And
right.
We also know that the more you use your brain, the more it works to create new neural networks.
Right.
So I tried to do a lot of learning to the degree that I was able to at that mindset. And it did help a lot. It took me, from being damaged at level 10 to maybe damaged at level 8. And,
okay. So progress.
My medical team never once said, maybe we should give you an MRI or a CAT scan or anything like that. I don't know if you ever see in the movies when, somebody gets bonked in the head and they're waking them up and, the doctor's like, follow,
Right.
That was the extent of the neurological intervention that I had over that summer.
That's really bizarre.
Yeah.
That's surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, if it only happened once, I could see that. But when they knew that it was a repeated event, I would have thought somebody would have said, we ought to take a look at what's going on here.
Yeah, you normally do a CAT scan right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember one incident when I was already in the hospital and I had one of these incidents and I collapsed in a washroom and hit my head. I bounced off a cement sink counter.
Ouch.
And when I came to, and again, the doctors don't know why this happened to me. They don't know why my heart started stopping, if that makes sense. And they don't know why it started starting again. So after I bonked my head and came around, I struggled back to the nursing station. And I've got a black eye, I'm cut and I'm everything. And they're like, what happened to you? I mean,
wow.
You've been my nurse for 10 days. What do you think happened to me?
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's just crazy.
So were you in like a positive mindset that whole time, or were you more like, what's going on? Why is no one kind of treating me? Like,
I was pretty shell shocked. So, I normally have a more, I'll say assertive, probably back then, I had a more aggressive personality. And, I would have snarked at the doctors, like, what's the language allowance on here?
Well, the FCC isn't monitoring us, so you can get away with almost anything. I tend to keep it clean, but I've had people swear like sailors, so,
So, okay. So I would have said to the doctors, like, what the sailor word are you guys doing? Like, we're not making any progress here. But I didn't. And I was sort of, at their mercy at this hospital. It was finally one doctor came in after they had me on a Holter monitor. That's one of those portable ECG machines.
Right.
And they gave it to me on a Friday afternoon. I had the incident where I collapsed in the washroom. And then I said, why don't you just read this? Because it'll show you exactly what happened. And they said, oh, well, they've gone home for the weekend. And because of budget cuts, we don't have anybody back until Tuesday afternoon.
Oh, good God.
Oh, my God.
Oh, jeez.
So, and we'd like you to go home.
Oh, my God.
Not a chance.
Wow.
Oh, my goodness. That's just unbelievable.
So it's part of my story. So suffice to say, I stayed in the hospital over the weekend. Tuesday afternoon comes by, and the cardiologist comes running into the room, and he's like, holy shit, your heart's been stopping. Gee, thanks, Doc.
Yeah, thank God he wasn't off for another week.
Right?
Oh, my God.
Wow.
That was pretty mind blowing. But again,
plus it doesn't give you a lot of sense of self-confidence or confidence in the medical staff. I mean, that has to affect you psychologically. Yeah,
but again, I was so battered at that point that I really wasn't.
You were pretty much out of it.
Yeah. It was a difficult time. You don't really understand. I did another podcast, and I think she titled it "When You're Fighting the Battles You Don't Even Know You Have to Fight." Which
that's
is
a good title.
Kind of what I was going through.
Mm-hmm.
So they eventually figured out I have a condition called a full AV block, atrial ventricle.
Oh, okay.
So the electrical system. Now you're going to get your medical degrees out of this. Mm-hmm. So
sounds good. Okay.
You have an electrical system in your heart, and it controls the beating and contracting of your ventricles and atrium. They're supposed to be synchronized, and the electrical system that I had stopped functioning. So it wasn't telling the atria and my ventricle to beat. And so you have no blood pressure, no blood going to your brain, no oxygen, and you're dead. And there's a really good clip of this if you're interested on the Cleveland Clinic website. If you look up full heart block, Cleveland Clinic's the premier cardiac hospital possibly in the world, for sure in the U.S. In the U.S. Okay. So,
very interesting.
Anyhow.
And the thought that comes to my mind is, okay, you had these experiences, your heart stopped. We could describe that as a heart attack. That's basically any heart stoppage could be described as a heart attack, although it might be might not be what the medical people call it, but I think lay people would certainly say, well, your heart stopped. I mean, whatever you want to call it. But to me, the most amazing thing is your heart started again.
Yeah.
Even after 5 minutes.
Yeah. And that's got them stumped too. And even today when I go in for a checkup and I'll talk to, my doctor, they ended up fixing it with a pacemaker, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So my pacemaker doctor, I said, why did my heart start again? He's like, we have no clue. We just have no clue.
So do you have any sense yourself? I mean, was there some sort of, you mentioned God doesn't make mistakes. So do you have a sense of, well, why would this happen?
Well, he doesn't make mistakes, but I think he does have a pretty mischievous sense of humor.
Yeah, I can understand. Yeah.
So, I just believe that, I'm here for a reason. And right now I think helping people who are in similar situations is my purpose, or one of my purposes. And I'll go with that until I get a sign that, I'm supposed to be moving in another direction.
I think that's a good read, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I mentioned earlier that I'd had a guest on during my first year who had also been through near-death experiences. And that was his reason for why he came back. Now, he did have all of the afterlife type, experiencing, here's what happened, you're floating above your body. He had all that kind of stuff going on. But at the end of the day, the way he described it was he had the option of whether to come back or not. He could just stay dead or he could come back to life. And he chose both times to come back to life. And he did it for the exact reason you just gave. Because he felt like he was here to help other people. He was here to help people dealing with similar situations to what he dealt with. Now, in his case, it was, there were two of them. One was where he was working on a merchant marine, so similar to Coast Guard, a merchant marine cutter, and actually went overboard and drowned.
Oh,
and then
wow.
the second incident was when he developed cancer in his lungs, and the cancer actually took over his lung, and he was, given like a month to live. And that was in the 1990s, and I interviewed him in 2013, so clearly he outlived the averages. So different circumstances from what you experienced, but the same net result. I'm here, he said, to help other people to understand, first of all, you can get through whatever it is you're getting through. And by the way, I also have the story to tell that, the other side's a pretty cool place. So you don't have that part of the story, but you certainly have the first part. You have the part where you can say, yeah, you can get through this. I have been through stuff, and I can give you some stories that maybe will help you to, go through your own improvement, go through your own healing.
Or have a deal. Like, part of this is, you're going through adversity, and some people are just naturally gifted in going through adversity and being resilient.
True.
And other people, it's an acquired skill. And I think my parents both had very hard lives with medical issues.
Really?
And even though and nothing related to this, like absolutely nothing, they still had to provide for a family of three. And, while they didn't overtly say, okay, this is the adversity I'm, going through right now, and this is how I'm going to beat it. But I do think that I somehow absorbed by osmosis some of their traits and their, this is how you keep going. And, I'm not going to say it won't bother you, but you can still power through it.
You can power through it. And I mean, I may be putting words in your mouth. So if I am, tell me. But I think probably, among other things, you have found yourself shifting your perspective about an experience like this because you went through it. My guess is that you had beliefs and attitudes beforehand that have shifted a bit because you've gone through it. Am I right?
Yes. So religiously, I lean more toward the Orthodox Judaism side.
Okay.
And so I had a pretty firm belief in God, maybe not exactly how, it's pictured in the general world, but that, God's running the show. And you have two ways to go when you have an experience like this. You can say, why is God putting me through this?
Sure.
And screw that. Like, I've been good. I've done my prayers. I've eaten my vitamins like how Hulk Hogan tells you to, and all that, and screw off. Or you can say, okay, I'm going to double down and see if I can be a little bit more of what maybe I'm supposed to be in the God workshop.
The God workshop? Okay. That's a good term. I like that. In a sense, I guess we could draw from Old Testament teaching, to use the Christian term, the story of Job. I mean, Job was tested in a whole series of different ways, and each time it was an opportunity to, are you going to stick with me, or are you going to go off on your own little journey all by yourself there? Which way is it going to be? And Job eventually made the choice, yeah, okay, I'll stick with you. I'll keep going here.
Why? We don't know, but I will.
Yeah, that's right. Especially considering what he was put through. No doubt about that. Yeah.
It's sort of like I heard on a podcast maybe today, maybe yesterday, about when they were going through all the Occupy movements, the Occupy Wall Street.
Right.
And there was one park that had 3,000 people, and one guy was trying to organize them, and he's got his bullhorn out, and he's like, "Hey, should we march now?" And everybody just stood around. And then a woman grabbed her megaphone and screamed, "Let's go! Let's start marching! March, march, march!" And everybody just went. They don't know why. They just did. They just went along with what the crowd was doing.
So a bit of a lemming effect going on there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm just hopefully getting some people to follow my lead. And your attitude is everything. I mean,
Talk about that. Talk about how important that attitude is, because I do believe that's a big deal. I think the British does too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I do intermittent fasting, which I was going to talk about later, but
Sure.
Your body is actually driven by your gut microbiome with these thousands of bacteria, positive. Actually, there's trillions of them. And they affect everything in your body, and we don't even realize it, and we don't even have a full scope of how they work and why they work. But there's a thing called leaky gut syndrome.
Yes.
Where the bacteria go through this one cellular layer that is supposed to protect your body from all the bacteria, and they eat through it, and it starts to inflame your body. And one of the things it does is it starts reducing the amount of serotonin produced in the body. Now, most of us think serotonin is a brain thing, and it's produced in the brain because that's where it's used. But 80% of our serotonin is produced in your digestive tract.
In the gut, yeah.
And when it gets out of whack, you're not getting near the serotonin you're going to need. And my belief in this is that's a leading cause of depression.
Sure.
Because your system's not working, and it kills your intuition.
Yes.
It puts up a blockade between trusting your gut. Like, there's a reason there's that phrase.
Right.
And it cuts you off from all sorts of things in the world. And where you could normally see something positive or an opportunity, we're being blocked from things like that. So when I was fortunate enough to be a moderator in an intermittent fasting group based on the book Delay, Don't Deny by Jen Stevens, there's 335,000 people in there, mostly women. And that's one of the most common pieces of advice that I would give to people is, your mindset is everything. Like, if you believe right from the get-go that you're going to fall back into your old belief patterns or behavioral patterns, that's likely what's going to happen. I'm not saying it's easy to be super positive and mindful all the time. There's things we have to work at. But if you think you're going to be successful, the odds of it are going to be a lot greater.
Are there particular...
So how did you stay positive?
Yeah. That's kind of along the line of what I was going to ask, yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
How did you stay positive during all of this? I imagine it was hard going through everything you went through and still staying positive.
Well, I think I do have some of that resiliency gene. I had a good therapist. She helped a lot. I had a great community supporting me.
Yes.
I don't think I was consciously thinking, gotta be positive. I'm going to get my life back. But you sort of, I guess there's a wave that sort of carries you if you're in the right circumstances. And if you put your life in the right circumstances, it'll help you. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that your personality as an adult is generally a composite of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And your personality will reflect the values of those people. And the people that are in my inner 5, or I could say even my inner 20, are all very, very positive, successful people. And I believe I feed off that.
Yeah, I think that's huge.
I do
Yeah,
too.
for sure.
That's a theme that we touch upon here a lot, the idea of social connectedness and the degree that your social connectedness supports you in whatever it is that you are dealing with in life, whatever you're experiencing. In your case, it was a fairly severe medical condition, but it could be anything. It could be a job change. It could be a relationship change or improvement in a relationship. It could be like what you went through. It could be a health issue. It could be something related to hobbies. It could be related to almost anything, really. But the point is that when you have that connection to others and you hit that down the slope part where you're slipping, the connections that you have are the ones that help you to get through it. Well, the people who don't have those connections are the ones who actually suffer the most because they don't have anybody else to lean on. They don't have somebody else to help them get through, to give them the encouragement that they need. So I'm a total believer in that. Yeah, that's really, really important.
I think, and I'll use this analogy just because of the times we're in right now with COVID, but that social network inoculates you. It's a vaccine.
Yes.
To keep you away from the bad stuff, whatever that bad stuff is.
I agree. Yeah, that's a big deal.
We need to do more inoculating or vaccinating ourselves against the bad stuff.
What are some of your favorite ways to do that?
Learning, exercising, just, I have a group of guys that, if you're familiar with the books, the Talmud, okay. So they've been learning Talmud, which is very, very high level learning. It's all rabbinical discussions of minutia of law and things like that. They've been learning together for 20 years, and individually they've been learning this stuff for 50 years. Wow. And they're nice enough to let me learn with them. And I admit freely, I don't understand what the hell they're talking about the majority of the time. It's really hard, and it's meant to be really hard. But I think that just rewires your brain.
Just having the influence. Yeah.
Yeah. Just trying to do these puzzles and follow these rabbinic discussions. That's very healthy. So
I think you're right.
To your listeners, go find something high level to learn and let your brain do some of its natural healing.
That's a great idea. I mean, not just for somebody who's gone through some serious neural system stuff like you went through, but for anybody, no matter what it is you're dealing with in life, when you push yourself like that to learn something high level, you're asking yourself to perform at the highest level you can perform at that particular point in time. And when you do that, you're in growth mode.
Yeah.
That's when you're going to do the most growing.
100%. One of the most profound things that happened to me was in February of 2018. I'm going to leave out a whole bunch of my medical history for now because my pacemakers failed a number of times and I had a whole bunch of crazy surgeries after that.
Yeah.
I was sitting in my doctor's office as a cardiologist, and he comes in and he literally throws a book at me. And this book is The Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung, who is Toronto-based nephrologist, kidney doctor. I'm in Toronto as well. And my doctor said, buy this, read this, do this. But only after we get buy-in from all your other doctors. So it's all about the foundations of intermittent fasting. So when I read it, and it took about 2 months for me to get buy-in from my other doctors, the endocrinologist, the other cardiologist, psychiatrist, family doctor, there's a laundry list.
Sure.
The whole premise behind it was for weight loss. That's what all these doctors were prescribing it for.
Right.
And they weren't really aware of all the healing properties that intermittent fasting brings to you. And
Can you describe some of those?
Sure. I reversed my type 2 diabetes because of intermittent fasting.
Whoa.
So the first time I went in the hospital, I had been diagnosed as type 2 diabetes. I had no idea. My blood sugars, in Canadian, they were 23. In US, there was something like 440,
Wow.
which is basically, I had caramel running through my veins.
Yeah.
And so I was immediately put on insulin.
Mm-hmm.
And within 6 months of starting intermittent fasting, all my numbers were perfectly normal.
Wow.
That's fixed.
Wow.
And that's not an uncommon thing. People have fixed their thyroids. People have fixed their Crohn's and IBS.
Mm-hmm.
People have fixed their rheumatoid arthritis. Women have reported reversing their PCOS, their polycystic ovary syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
and have found themselves able to have children when they weren't before.
Wow.
And it works to normalize your hormones. And our hormones do multiple things. Each hormone, we think it does one thing, but it does multiple things. So when you start intermittent fasting, it starts to drive down your basal levels of insulin.
Okay.
So when you're type 2 diabetic or you have metabolic syndrome or you're insulin resistant, you have too much insulin floating around in your system. And that causes a cascade effect with other hormones. One of the other things that insulin does is if there's too much floating around, it hardens your arteries. It reduces their ability to dilate and contract.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why your blood pressure goes up when you're type 2 diabetic, or one of the contributing factors.
Mm-hmm.
So when your insulin levels go down, your other hormones tend to fall in line. And that's why things like thyroid and arthritis get corrected. That's why your type 2 diabetes goes away. And it gets rid of that inflammation from the leaky gut.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
I grew up, I played hockey. I mean, I'm Canadian. It's the law here. So, and I was playing outside as a kid and minus 30, minus 40 weather. We didn't know what wind chill was
Right.
back then. Just go out there and come back 3 hours later. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I played probably 25 years of hockey. I played
Wow.
American football. I played college rugby.
Mm-hmm. Boy.
And at one point in the early 2000s, I was 340 pounds.
Wow. Yeah.
My body has taken a lot of abuse.
Mm.
And there were days I could not get out of bed. Like every joint hurt.
Wow.
And probably within 2 months of starting the fasting, all that inflammation went away. I do not have an ache or pain in my body.
Good for you.
How long did you fast for? Like, was your intermittent, like how many hours was it?
When I started very conservatively because of all my underlying medical conditions and trying to manage medications. So I did a 12-hour fast and a 12-hour eating window, which is, to those of you who don't know intermittent fasting, that's not to say I'm supposed to eat for 12 hours. It's just a block of time when I'm allowed to eat.
That would be funny.
That would be extreme. No doubt.
Yeah. Let's just go to the buffet and
Stay all day.
yeah.
Right.
So that would have been, I guess, mid-May of 2018 when I started.
Mm-hmm.
And by September, I was able to do 23 ones. That's a 23-hour fast and one meal a day, or OMAD.
Wow.
In that 1 hour.
Wow.
And that's how fast it worked for me. You know, everybody's experience will be different depending on, and I guess we should mention, we're not giving out medical advice here. If you're going to, you know, get into intermittent fasting or anything like that, please check with your medical professionals.
Yep. Absolutely. Got to be smart about it.
Yeah.
In addition to being smart about it too, I want to go back to a previous topic and see how it ties in, because you were talking earlier about how important it was to have a good mindset dealing with all that you were dealing with. And so I'm wondering what happened, to what degree did you bring mindset into the intermittent fasting, and what role did it play?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. When my doctor threw the book at me and said, you know, to read this, you know, buy this, read this, do this, and I bought it and I read it, and I never questioned it because I'm a little bit of a science person, and the explanation Dr. Fung lays out about why this works for you just made so much sense for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or to me. And I had no reason to doubt it. So I said, this is going to work. And I just kept at it. And I saw pretty quickly it was working. And as opposed to when you're on traditional diets, because, you know, we're eating the standard North American quality food, you lose weight really quickly, and then you can't sustain that deprivation that you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you break and you start eating again, and you flood your body. And something I just learned a few weeks ago is the bacteria in your digestive tract actually are aware of all these diets you're going on. And they don't like it when you put your body into starvation. And they're the primary driver of why you go over your previous weight 5, 10, or 15 pounds.
Ah, okay.
So, I learned that from Dr. Iran Ilanov, who's a gut biome researcher in Israel.
Okay.
And he was on the Dr. Rhonda Patrick podcast. So I found that very fascinating.
Yeah, sure.
I'm
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying I've gotten a little off track here, I think. So.
Oh, that's all right. You're actually on the track that I was looking for. I just wanted, I'll kind of give you a nudge more in the direction that I'm looking for. Talking about the importance of the mindset when you engage in something like this. Because you described very eloquently how you had total belief when you started the program. You had read the book made total sense to you, it just resonated inside, so you're going to trust it without any doubt at all, and you just dove right into it. And when you were saying that, the thought that went through my mind was, well, that's what made a huge difference. When you have that mindset, you're going to make it work, just because your mindset's helping you to make it work. Was that what your experience was?
It was. I think it's also the fact that I had my entire medical team were like, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they didn't know a lot about it. They did a little bit of research, and they said, we think this could really help you. So,
that helps.
Yes.
Their confidence helps you a lot, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that, you know, doctors have tried to kill me 50 times or whatever the number turned out to be.
We'll leave that one aside for a moment.
Yeah. But for this, total buy-in.
Yeah.
So when you do your fasting, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You know me, Bridge. I tend to just dominate, so you just jump right in.
I love
no problem.
But when you did your fasting, or when you started, did you find yourself like connecting more to just your like inner self since you were fasting? Like, did anything, you know, like spiritual happen to you, or you?
I guess it depends how you define spiritual. So I think we all have our own definition of what that means. You definitely get more in touch with your body's own signals. You know, starting with your hunger and satiety hormones, and you start to listen to your body. And you're running on ketones as opposed to carbohydrates. And your brain likes those much more than sugars. And a brain fog clears that most people don't even realize they have. And you're just able to see so much more of the world and think in ways that you would never be able to think before. Now, when I started this and I tried to make that video, which Walt told me wasn't really showing up on my profile, I learned that all by myself. And before I was fasting, I would never have been able to figure out that software. I would never
So you were
have
more
been
clear?
able to. Yeah. Fasting repairs your brain. When you fast, it releases from these epigenetic pathways neurotropic factors that start rebuilding pathways, your neurons, your axons, your dendrites, the connecting things. And it just allows you to perform higher.
It makes total sense.
Whatever. Yeah. And, I guess if you're, to me, there's a difference between being religious and being spiritual. And spiritual is more of a feeling, and being religious is more of a practice.
Okay.
So I think if you're a naturally spiritual person, you'll get a significant bump out of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Also, what you were describing in terms of how the physiology operates there reminded me very much of something that my sister-in-law once told me about. She recently got her doctorate in statistics, but while she was pursuing it, she'd actually, for most of that time period, been trying to pursue it in the fields of neuroscience and biology, and was looking for some sort of a bridge in there to build her degree on. She ultimately ended up settling on the statistics, but she studied a lot of this stuff. One of the things that she told me about was, they have all these different ways of wiring us up, which they probably would have done with you if they had actually had their mindset in a better place, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But the point is, they can wire us up, they can check what's going on in terms of detecting when we're having certain kinds of thoughts or certain emotions. They can trace stuff through the nervous system. They can check stuff at the cellular level. They can determine whether there's healing going on. They could determine where cells are dying off. They can track all of this stuff. And they've gotten to the point now where they can wire all that up to a test subject in a lab. And then they can induce the test subject to focus on something that has a really, really happy feeling to it. Something that has an intensive happy feeling. And then they can trace through the entire system down to the cellular level. And they can see that within 90 seconds of that happy thought, that at the cellular level, they can spot all this healing going on, particularly in an injured or diseased area. And then if they reverse the process and they ask the subject to focus on something angry or frustrated or, something in a more negative range, and then trace it down through the whole system again, they find the exact same thing going on, except at the cellular level, the cells are being killed off. So it's a dying process going on. And it all happens within a 90-second time frame, which is just mind-blowing as far as I'm concerned. So when you're talking about the ability to, first of all, buy into this program, and you had a total buy-in, so you had a very affirmative, very grateful, appreciative, positive view of the whole thing. Like, yes, this is going to work. I'm really there. You're sending all these signals to your body to heal. And then you're engaging in the intermittent fasting process and you're reinforcing all those signals. And then you get a result in how long did it take before you got your first real big result?
Probably within 6 weeks.
So about 6 weeks, you got this huge result, and that all fed into that. And all I can think to myself is, what if you had been in a space where you doubted the whole thing, you really didn't think it was going to work, you didn't trust the doctors, what they were telling you and so forth. I'll bet you never would have had a healing result out of it, just because you would have sabotaged your own effort.
My experience with so many other people in the fasting group that I was coaching is some people are naturally predisposed to being negative. And I don't know if that's because they got this funky combination of bacteria in their system that just predisposes them, or, whatever the reason. They were obviously less successful than other fasters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very educational, I think, to look at what happens in these healing processes. And it's great to know that you can take control, because that's really what you did. You took control. You decided, okay, I'm going to be responsible for my own healing. I don't know how to do it necessarily. I'm going to listen to what they have in the book, and I'm going to do it.
I would attribute the large majority of my healing, especially the brain trauma, to it's all happened after I've been intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
And you were able to buy in completely and make it work. That's just fabulous. That's just really, really fabulous to have that kind of result.
And I see it in others, so it gets reinforced that way.
Yeah.
And, I'd go out for meals with some people, and I'd say, sorry, I'm not eating. I'll just drink water. We don't do a dry fast, I should say.
Oh, okay. That's probably good because you need to stay hydrated, so that's important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the company I was keeping had more difficulty with me being fasting than I did.
Than you did.
They're just like, oh no, you're not eating. That can't be healthy. Actually, it is very healthy, So, if you hang out in a Jewish crowd, it's like, eat.
Yes. Jewish and Italian. Yeah, those are the two.
Yeah. So they eventually get used to it as well. And then I won't say it happens all the time, but then I'll say, can you tell me how to do this? Like they see it's working for me and keeping me healthy and keeping me out of the hospital.
Right.
And things of that nature. So,
it's often hard to argue with the results. Yeah, when you see the results, you may have, a person might have resistance points of various kinds, but when you start seeing results, that's when we're able to start making some shifts in the way we perceive things. We think about them a little bit differently.
Yes. And I think our pop culture has sort of tainted our view on how fast things should work for us.
Oh, yeah.
And, everything has to be instant, and it's getting worse with the TikToks. Because we've watched since the original Star Trek, where the doctor would just come over you with a wand,
right?
And in 8 seconds, oh, this is your issue, and then 14 seconds later, they've used some laser or whatever to fix you up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that just isn't the way the world works.
Well, except we do carry the communicators with us, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. Even now you're watching things like Grey's Anatomy or, I just see so many things that I've experienced that I know that's not the way it happens in the hospital. And, after one of my collapses, before they gave me my pacemaker, I opened my eyes and they were about to hit me with the paddles.
Mm.
And 10, 12 people in the room.
Wow.
And, and then they left me alone.
Mm-hmm.
They thought I was fine. And then it happened again. And this time there was like 25 people in the room. I have no idea what they all had to be there for.
Mm.
And they actually had to move my roommate. They took him in his bed out of the room to make room for all of them.
Wow.
So, and I've seen code blues in the cardiac ward.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's not like 8 seconds. Every person that needs to be there is there with the perfect instrument and the perfect medication and the perfect knowledge. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, there's no choreographer.
Yeah. So to think that any tool that you use is just going to be a straight line with no twists or turns and no setbacks is unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
But what is realistic is how you choose to deal with whatever level of adversity you're going to deal with.
If you were to apply a score to that, I mean, doctors do that all the time. Yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you feeling right now? That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to apply that same kind of scale to the importance of mindset, where would you put mindset on a scale of 1 to 10?
30.
Okay. That says it. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
not
really
to minimize anybody else's issues, but if there's ever been anybody who had a reason to just, I give up. I mean, and it's just never popped into my mind. Never. I've got to somehow.
What do you attribute that to? What, the fact that it didn't pop into your mind, what do you attribute that to?
It's a great question. I don't know. I think it's resilience and overcoming adversity are like a muscle. The more you work it, the better it becomes. And I guess I've just gotten my overcoming adversity and resilience muscles up to a level where they're almost self-sustaining. You don't have to, run your marathon every day, but you can go for shorter runs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that every time I help somebody, whether it's with their intermittent fasting or something else, I think that's also exercising that muscle that flows back to me.
Yeah.
I think
do you
that's true.
Coach people on just intermittent fasting, or do you coach them on mindset as well, or does it go hand in hand when you coach people?
They go hand in hand to a degree, but usually the mindset comes up when people start getting frustrated that they haven't lost 32 pounds in 8 days, like it says on the magazine when you're checking out of the grocery store.
Understandably, yes. You're right, because mindset usually is not something for most people that becomes a major thing until all of a sudden they're facing, well, here's what happens when my mindset wasn't there.
Yeah, there's so many things in our education system that we take for granted that actually should be taught.
Mm-hmm.
And, things like, how do you do homework? The teachers just assign homework and assume you know how to do homework. But I think there's a lot of kids. I know I certainly didn't know how to do homework. Good communication skills aren't taught. And I don't think having a positive mindset is taught.
I will say this. In the course of my life, I can say that when I compare what I remember from when I was growing up to what I'm seeing now around me, there's still plenty of population that doesn't appreciate the importance of the positive mindset, but there's a larger chunk that are. The percentage has grown. The influence, the impact of people who believe in maintaining a positive, upbeat mindset has increased. So I see that as like the great improvement that has occurred during my lifetime, just the overall improvement in mindset. Not across the board necessarily, but more people than ever before realizing, yeah, this is important. I got to pay attention to this. Even if it wasn't taught to me in school, this is really important. This is something that I need to take on board.
Those are people that have their antennas tuned before others have their antennas tuned. So I remember when I was in financial services and I was selling life insurance and investment products and stuff like that. And even before that, I mean, the top performers were all going to see people like Brian Tracy and reading Og Mandino and, I'm drawing a blank here. Any of these types of, positive, Ken Blanchard, the list goes on if I didn't have brain damage, but
that's all right. I don't have the brain damage and I can't remember half the time, so you're not alone on that one.
So, but it was, largely the top performers that were always making that investment or starting off the day, reading some sort of book, whether it was a Bible or something on sales technique or, maintaining relationships, coming into the office 15, 20 minutes early and going through whatever ritual they went through. But, they're the ones that were ahead of the crowd, and they were doing this, 30 years ago. And I'm sure there was a select group before that were doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the number of authors was limited. It was a limited set. I mean, you named a few of them. There was Norman Vincent Peale, Dale Carnegie, Napoleon Hill. I mean, there were a number of them, but they were a relatively small handful. Today, you can find a larger group of them. And so even the number of leaders has improved, in terms of numbers, which is a great thing.
Yeah, I was actually a Dale Carnegie disciple for a while, and I
Really?
was
Okay.
a trainer. Yes.
A trainer for Dale Carnegie. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, it makes sense. You were in a sales field. I mean, how to win friends and influence people. That's part and parcel.
It's funny if you read that book now, how dated the writing seems.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's like, and the people he's using for examples,
Yeah.
like, Franklin Roosevelt or things like that, or the pulp culture references of his time
Right.
are so different.
Very.
But the message is still fantastic.
It's the same message, yeah. The principles haven't changed. The principles are just as important now as they were then, and vice versa. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. It may be dated in terms of the examples, but the importance of the underlying meaning, that never changes, I don't think. Yeah, that's a really big deal. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. This has been really interesting.
Thank you.
Especially interesting talking to somebody who's been through them and not had all of the, other side spiritual experiences, and yet has come through it. I mean, what got you through it was your mindset, and that's really what's at the forefront of all of it anyway. So this has been very interesting. Thank you for sharing your story today.
My pleasure. You're very welcome.
Very glad to have
yourself a
had
great
you. Yep, you do the same. Just a little heads up, we got Dave Combe coming tomorrow. He's a pianist who has made a career out of music. He's going to be talking about that tomorrow. And then on Thursday, Robert Riopel, who is an amazing guy. This guy he knows like the big movers and shakers of the world. He was on the show a few weeks ago, and he's going to be back again. So more stuff to look forward to. But in the meantime, thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Fred. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. And we will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.